I trust that you're enjoying the conference thus far and that you had a chance to hear today's keynote speakers and the other panel discussion. It is now time to discuss the important topic of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. More specifically, the goal of this panel is to ask what can we learn from recent experiences in both Haiti and Pakistan. The recent earthquakes, tsunamis, tornadoes, and flooding serve as powerful reminders that this will always be a relevant topic for us. Our moderator is eminently qualified to lead our distinguished group of panelists. Dr. Linton Wells II is the Director of the Center for Technology and National Security Policy at National Defense University. He is also a distinguished research professor and serves as the Transformation Chair. Prior to coming to NDU, Dr. Wells served in several different positions in the Office of the Secretary of Defense from 1991 to 2007, serving last as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Networks and Information Integration. In 26 years of naval service, Dr. Wells served in a variety of surface ships, including command of a destroyer squadron and a guided missile destroyer. Recently, he has been focusing on star tides, a research project focusing on affordable, sustainable support to stressed populations and public-private interoperability. A 1967 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Dr. Wells holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Physics and Oceanography. He is also a graduate of the Johns Hopkins University, where he holds a Master of Science in Mathematical Sciences and a doctorate in International Relations. I will now let Dr. Wells introduce his distinguished panel. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Dr. Lynn Wells.
Thank you. Can you all hear me in the back? Hear me okay? Okay. So I think the topic is absolutely terrific, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and our panelists here certainly know of what they speak. Lieutenant General Ken Keane is Deputy Commander of U.S. Southern Command, but more to the point, he was Commander of Joint Task Force Haiti on the ground in Haiti when the earthquake occurred, and helped to shepherd our military efforts through that enormously important time. Vice Admiral Rob Parker is the Commander of the Coast Guard Atlantic region, or Atlantic area. And he was, at the time of the earthquake, on the SOUTHCOM staff as a Director of Security Intelligence, which later became the J3. And our final panelist here is Rear Admiral Sinclair Harris, who is the Director of the Navy Irregular Warfare Office, but he was, for the Pakistani floods, Commander of Combined Task Force 59, and also has extensive experience in Hurricane Katrina. So I think our panelists have enormous background and look forward to hearing their views. One of the reasons why this is so important is we in the military do a lot of this. I saw a statistic that since the 1970s, the military has done something like over 350 humanitarian operations compared with 22 combat operations. I mean, it's an exceptional number and something we need to get better at. This is a hard job. It's got very complicated authorities, whether domestically or abroad. It has a diverse collection of actors, whether public, private, whole of government, transnational, and the timelines are enormously short. I mean, people have to be pulled out of rubble in the first 72-odd hours or they don't make it in most cases. So how you pull together these sorts of unity of action type situations where there's never going to be unity of command, much as we would like to see it, is a very important role. One of the things I would like to ask our panelists to talk about from their own experiences, the importance of communications, information communications. In many respects, comms and the power that it takes to power them are often treated as sort of techie adjuncts to the major muscle movements of delivering food, shelter, and water, when in fact they're the critical enablers of everything else that happens. And so I'd appreciate the views of the panelists on that. So without further ado, let me turn it over to General Keane. I'd like to each panelist to talk for maybe 6 to 8 minutes or so, and then we'll have about a 15-minute moderated discussion among us and an opening for questions. Sir.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wells, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak about this briefly and then address any questions. And I will stick to trying to talk a little bit about some lessons from Haiti with respect to communications and information sharing. And just to share a little anecdote, I was with the ambassador at the time of the earthquake, and obviously it was of such magnitude, it was immediately apparent that it was devastating, and we could tell just from the initial phone calls, radio calls that he was getting, that there was significant deaths and destruction in the city. And because of the damage that was done, for the next 12 to 18 hours, my means of communication with Rob Parker here and his deputy was through my BlackBerry text message, because the phone on the BlackBerry wouldn't work because the towers had been damaged. And there was one phone line in the ambassador's residence that was working, but and had international access, but the only way I could use it was by using my phone card. So between my phone card minutes and texting the BlackBerry message, we were able to communicate back to SOUTHCOM and to General Fraser. And that was for the first 12 to 18 hours until we were able to get to the embassy and to get our robust comms up and running. But I think as we look at this from information sharing, I would say from my perspective, from the JTF perspective, I would highlight 4 things. One was obviously with all the actors that are involved in any disaster response, and in Haiti we're talking about a country that's the poorest in the Western Hemisphere and had little to no capacity for the country itself to provide assistance. Of course, they were devastated themselves. 16 of the 17 ministry buildings were completely collapsed with the workers that were in those buildings at the time. So even if they had capacity, they were impacted. But the leadership of all the actors in Haiti, that was the United Nations, that was MINUSTA, that was the United States Agency for International Development, the American Embassy, and then those ministers. The leadership of these organizations must have the right approach, the right attitude in order to work together and make it the priority effort and reach out to one another. We were fortunate in Haiti that we were able to do that, and we were able to reach out to one another fairly quickly following the first few days of the earthquake, and also not just the primary actors, but particularly the public-private sector that was on the ground and the NGOs. And the NGOs really were the muscle for providing the relief effort in Haiti, and our job was really to facilitate them to a great degree to be able to do their job. The second thing is partnership, and a willingness to partner with everyone who is responding, because we didn't control who showed up in Haiti. And everyone showed up with different capabilities and capacities. A big part of my job and the other folks on the ground there with the UN was to try to determine what unique capabilities they had. The third one was coordination and collaboration, and doing it in an unclassified manner. And we made this operation unclassified from the immediate go, and that facilitated a great degree on what we were able to do, and working with Rob Parker and SOUTHCOM and our Foreign Disclosure Office to ensure that everything we pushed down, satellite imagery and everything else, it could be shared and released to all of our partners on the ground. And then the last thing that I would highlight was communicate, communicate, communicate. And that goes to at the tactical level, soldier level, as well as at the JTF commander's level. And I tried to spend every day 4 to 6 hours outside the embassy, going to displaced persons camp, visiting the United Nations, visiting NGOs, to understand better what our priorities should be. There was a couple things that I know we want to touch on here, and how we facilitate these things: partnership, coordinate, and collaborate, and to communicate. And there's the tools that we tried to develop. I mentioned earlier we were stuck with a BlackBerry and an international phone card initially, but that obviously is not what needs to happen. We tried to put in place, as we stood up the JTF, a couple different mechanisms. One was an internet site using Google and a database that could be accessed by all players to basically map everything on the ground, whether it was displaced persons camps or food distribution points, and tried to make that accessible and also used by the NGOs and the United Nations and folks on the ground. It worked in part, but not to the degree that we would have liked to have seen it work. The other tool that was used at SOUTHCOM was the All Partnership Access Network, APAN, which we basically were experimenting with. It was started by PACOM, and it was used really by the SOUTHCOM and the NGOs, CONUS-based, and it was credited in a couple cases of saving lives by just being able to collaborate and pass information quickly to the extent that identifying requirements that some of us on the ground did not know existed, but individuals would come up on APAN, ask for assistance, and very quickly at SOUTHCOM they were able to turn that request into pushing a piece of equipment that was needed, or relaying information to those of us on the ground, directing us to a building where there was individuals that were trapped inside the building. We have several instances where that occurred. And the last thing I would say is we have published a number of lessons from Haiti, and how do we incorporate those areas I mentioned in particular there. And one of them that we have benefited from Haiti, and that is a greater partnership with the public-private sector and NGO community, and that we are trying to do exercises together so that we aren't trading business cards after the crisis, but that we are working together now, learning protocols that we can put in place so that we hopefully, when the next crisis occurs, and it surely will in SOUTHCOM's area as we get towards hurricane season here, we know how to operate better together, and some of these systems and processes will be established and be much better facilitated. So with that, I think I'll just stop there and then be able to take any questions now.
Thank you very much. We'll take the questions at the end. So, Admiral?
Thank you. It really is a pleasure to be here today. I was reminded when I transited from Miami, where I was in the J3 down there, and the earthquake response was still going on last April, and literally drove up 95 as the Macondo well was exploding, the Deepwater Horizon incident, to take this job, and then got a rather unflattering welcome from the NORTHCOM commander about my magnetism to these kinds of events. It really is easy to look at how you draw a thread through the things that are common here. So I can take some of the things that Ken's mentioned and talk through some of the things that I think are common throughout these different events. First of all, I've got 32 years of commissioned service. About 27 of those have been in actual Coast Guard operations, so I've seen and done a lot of things. I get quoted a lot by my immediate staff for some quips that I have, but one of the things I've created is a sense of rules for operations, and the first rule of operations is that the first report is always wrong. And this was never proved more the case than certainly what we had. When I got that very first phone call, we knew it was bad, we didn't know how bad, and it was way worse than we could have ever imagined until we actually got the first report. The second thing that comes from that is that when you get that first report, you do a series of things. My first thing I did, and this is instructive to the 4 points that I've got, my first thing I did was I made 2 phone calls. The first one was to the then Coast Guard commander at District 7, Admiral Branham. I said, look, you've got command and control in place, you've got ships down there, you've got people and aircraft down there. Everything I've got that's down there at SOUTHCOM is yours. Let us get our organization stood up. Meanwhile, you can run the life-saving operations at the front end for the first 24 or 72 hours. And that really worked out well for us, including the evacuation of some of the Ken's folks and team that were down there, unfortunately, not all of them. So that was the first call. The second call, and that was easy. The second call was to the director of the Joint Staff, J3, Lieutenant General J. Paxton. I said, I don't know what I need, but I need a lot of it, and I need it yesterday. And I didn't know how prescient that was going to be because we needed an awful lot of things. In the course of the business, a lot of people pushed things to us, and then what came to be highlighted for me along the way, that there was a lot of things that we needed before the event, the pre-need issues, and I put those in 4 categories. One of them is relationships. We had a lot of those. We had relationships with the folks on the ground in Haiti. We had relationships with the country team. Ken knew the head of MINUSTA down there. That was hugely helpful. And we had relationships with the interagency and back and forth to the people that were going to provide things to us. The second one is an information sharing regime. This is not just about information and where it sits, but a practice of how you normally share information, where that goes, and then how you transition to that crisis, and whether that is in fact scalable to the crisis. We found that to be wanting in this particular case. The third one is a stable and agile organization. I would say we had a fragile and somewhat agile organization. SOUTHCOM was still in the final phases of trying to finish up a reorganization. So when we went into crisis, people revert back to their comfort mode, and their comfort mode was to be in a joint staff construct. So we went from what we'd been working with every day into something completely different. Be happy to talk about that later on. And the fourth one is clear lines of authority, coordination, and cooperation. You'll notice I didn't put command in there. My experience in crises is your chain of command happens immediately, and you know exactly where it goes. And then the communications piece that's so critical to all of us here is that which bridges the political environment in which you fight. And in this case, politics is like weather. You don't get to stop it, but you got to learn to fight wet. So you really need to understand that environment, and then how you translate that down to the tactical and operational level, where you're really looking for operational effect that's going to help there. Along the way, we lost control of the narrative, and that was because we could not, in a repeatable way, get information out that had veracity, that rang true across all the different stakeholders and folks that were out there, until we got this portal put up for APAN, and that was a long, long 6 weeks before we got that sorted out. Meanwhile, we're having 4 times a day briefings with the joint staff. We had the first 2 in the morning with the vice chairman, the second 2 in the afternoon and evening with the chairman. So my last brief with the chairman usually ended at around 11:30 at night, and the next one, the vice chairman, started at 4 o'clock in the morning. You do that after about 2 weeks, you start to get kind of silly. And when we became incoherent, we got a break, but it wasn't because we had necessarily solved the information flow. So communication's absolutely critical across a number of different ways. And that impacts not just your ability to operate, but also your credibility, which then impacts your ability to get the stuff that you need further on. So that APAN portal was absolutely huge for us, but it would have been huger if we'd had it up front. And let me stop there, and we'll be ready to take questions. Thank you.
Admiral Harris?
And Lynn, thank you again, and thank you ASEA and Naval Institute for having the opportunity to talk a little bit about the latest Pakistan disaster relief support. And I tell you right now, I'm speaking on behalf of Vice Admiral Lefevre, who was an operational commander, a gentleman, a scholar, and a person who has got incredible operational experience because he was there during Pakistan's earthquake as well as a striker commander. That brings home to the point that Rob just mentioned about the need to have those type of relationships to go in, because some people are harder to help than others. I will leave that alone and let Lieutenant General Keane figure out what that means when he goes to his next job in Pakistan. Also, there was Mike Nagata, U.S. Army, incredible operator, forward thinker, perfect tone setter for the things that me and my Marines that were part of the strike group that came from the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit and the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, coming off of ships like the Peleliu and the Kearsarge, that went in and did great work. They were flying missions like we're out of Vietnam, according to the MU commander from 15th MU. Let me speak directly to the point of communications and command control, and let me stop for a second and say, everything that the Lieutenant General and the Vice Admiral said, I say hua, is exactly correct. That's exactly true, and the same things in spades could be said about Pakistan. Just speak it in Urdu. 3 sergeants. Sergeant Weeks, U.S. Army. Sergeant Childress, U.S. Army. Sergeant Abel, U.S. Air Force. I had never met them before, didn't know who they were. When I found myself in the northern part of the Sindh province in Pakistan, falling in on a cantonment that hadn't been used in several years, had infrastructure that reminded me of the Wild West from movies that I had seen growing up. These three sergeants were there. They were from JFCOM, they were from the Joint Expeditionary Communications Element. I may have the term wrong, but they came from Norfolk and from Suffolk, and they showed up with all the comm gear and more that were needed to get the job started and make the job work. Because we were in a remote operation, a remote area, they started helping us to get power by allowing us to communicate with the loggies that came down to make sure that we had the contracting and ability to set up a base of operations and within 3 days be able to operate in vastly different parts of Pakistan. If you may recall, or maybe you don't recall, the geography was a challenge for us in Pakistan, and it was different. If you imagine an area the size of the eastern seaboard United States being underwater, that's what they were dealing with Pakistan. Some 1/5 of the country was underwater. In the north, we were operating in the foothills of the Himalaya mountains, in 2 of the airfields that were so dangerous that many would not fly into them. The Marine Corps Aviation would. Hard place to communicate. We had a number of different FARPs set up where 3 Marines and a radio were sent out and said, okay, shipmates, stand by. We'll make sure to get some food to you every so often. Try to stay warm, be ready to pump gas. Down to the Ascend province, which was all desert. So you go from a hilly green area, not far from, from the Swat Valley, and I think most people know what was going on over there, all the way through this operation, the terrorist operations that were going on, counter-terror operations going on. But down to the Sindh Valley, which was a farm area, flat, completely flooded. And again, we're operating across about 100 miles of what was rich farmland, trying to deliver to pockets of 50 to 500 people swimming across muddy rivers just trying to get whatever food they could because they hadn't had it in days. So the need for communications was great, it was varied, it was spread out over the entire AOR. I will end my comments with 3 of what I call common threads. From looking from Katrina to my observations from Pakistan, and these jive completely with what I'm hearing from Haiti and from others. Catching up, getting ahead, and transition. You are always in a catch-up phase to begin with humanitarian operations. Now we're getting better because we have better sensors now. They have a little bit better warning for the tsunamis and for earthquakes and whatnot, but you're always going to be in a catch-up mode because the media will be beating you down from the second that you're not there, wondering how come you couldn't fly your ships across the peninsula of Florida to get in time to support Katrina. The world is still large and wet, and it takes a while to get through there. But catching up is something you always have to do. Getting ahead, rapid planning, rapid assessment, rapid collaboration. I've also stayed away from the C word, command, because I found one thing I did not do when I was there, except for the Marines working with my strike group. I didn't command anything. I was in collaboration with the NGOs, with the Pakistanis, with their aid agencies and the like in getting anything done. But all that has to happen very rapidly and get the self-sustainment to make it continue, because again, you're trying to play catch up and trying to get ahead. And the last thing is transition. Trying to figure out when good enough is good enough is always difficult, especially when different nations have different capabilities, different desires, and understanding that there are other political ramifications and strategic things going on around there. I'll go ahead and end with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up then with a few questions based on the comments that have been made. General Keane mentioned that we're doing more training and exercising with the NGOs and the public-private partners. What are some examples of those, and there are opportunities for members of the audience or AFCEANs to get involved in those if they would like?
Well, there's a couple things. One of the things that SOUTHCOM established under Admiral Stavridis and has been restructured somewhat under General Frazier, but is our J9, is our outreach directorate, and in that directorate we focus on working with public-private sector, academia, and NGOs. Haiti presented the reality, obviously, of the need in this particular type of operation, being able to work with those communities in a very robust way. Something that was not uncommon in Latin America and the Caribbean before, but not to the degree that we saw in Haiti. And it opened doors where doors previously, I think, were closed. So there's been two opportunities that we've seen since Haiti and SOUTHCOM. One is we've had a lot more NGOs come forward and talk to us about working with us on ongoing exercises in Latin America where we're doing medical assistance and building schools, for example. We build a schoolhouse or a building, and NGO run by Gary Sinise, for example, called Operation International Children, provides all the supplies and school books for these schools. Other NGOs go on board ships during exercises around Latin America to provide medical assistance, healthcare providers. That paid huge dividends in Haiti and has paid huge dividends since then because we established relationships with those NGOs, so when the crisis happens, they know how to work with us, we know how to work with them, and to facilitate very rapidly getting them on board USNS Comfort or into the area that's needed. The other one is we do an annual exercise called Fuerzas Armadas Humanitarias, which is an armed forces humanitarian exercise that includes all the Central American and the Caribbean countries, and it is based upon disaster scenario. It's a tabletop exercise with tactical deployment of their, in some cases, their civilian as well as their military emergency management organizations in that country at the national and their regional level that would do these and respond to these, and we bring them together and we work through scenarios on a disaster in a country or region and how we would respond to that. That includes the United Nations as well as FEMA equivalent organizations in each of these countries as well as regionally, as well as trying to invite NGOs that work in the region, whether they be a World Food Program or World Vision or others that may have interest in working in that particular scenario. So we do this annual exercise. This year we saw a lot more interest from the public-private sector and NGOs to participate with us or to send observers to understand how these countries, Central America in particular and the Caribbean, would address some of these scenarios. But that's the principal areas that we are trying to reach out to take these lessons from Haiti and operationalize them, if you will.
So then the J9 on the SOUTHCOM staff would be the place that people
plug
go
in,
to.
yes, sir.
Okay. Talking about the J codes, let me turn this to Admiral Parker. You mentioned how the J codes reverted back to more traditional forms. What does this say about kind of innovation efforts if in time of crisis we go back to the way we're used to doing business? Either one, please.
I'll be happy to take that. I was actually a passionate advocate, along with Admiral Stavridis, that 90% of the business that SOUTHCOM did was better suited to that more agile organization. I think where the model didn't work for us was we had wrongly assumed along the way that we could just sort of scale up that same enterprise, thinking the people that would fold in on the organization would be largely other agencies, not DOD, in crisis, and then be able to carry on in that mode. What we found was when you get into crisis, another common thread is you're going to need a lot of help. Don't be afraid to ask for it. Sometimes you're going to get it whether you ask for it or not. It's better if you ask for what you need, not what you're just going to get. But what we got was exactly what we needed, and that was a whole lot of help from other joint staffs. And when the joint staff showed up, they didn't understand who we were, how we were organized. So we had a really tough decision that you know, do we change back to an organization that we haven't been in for 18 months in order to affect the operation because our primary interlocutor at that point was with the joint staff, and then all the other agencies plugged in with us. And you have to remember, too, the context of this was we were moving all the DoD parts in support of USAID. So that's another common thread, is that you don't get to own anything. You're in support of somebody else, but you have to command and control this stuff inside the lifelines. So in order to do that, the decision was made to go ahead and go back into the J-code staff because it was what was familiar for the people that showed up. I would argue that there's another model. And we do this all the time in the Coast Guard. The NIMS ICS, National Incident Management System Incident Command Structure, is a way that it started out with the Forest Service in California, a way to bring a whole bunch of disparate different folks together to speak a common language in crisis and know how to plug different things in a very, very loose and agile model. We've used that. We used that in Katrina. We use that again here for the oil spill down in the Gulf of Mexico. It is a great system. It has limitations because it's made for an incident. It doesn't. We're working on the operational level of that where you have a continuous campaign. But it really, really is a good way to bring people together, and it doesn't force you to change the fundamental organization of anybody that comes. But when you fold into what's called the unified command structure there, it becomes a very, very, very effective operation. The piece that's hard there, I think, in terms of this audience and the concern here, gets to the information regime that I talked about. How do you share that? You know, different things are called, you know, there are different structures are called different things wherever you go, but they call it the situation unit. And they're really the ones that capture what's going on and that help you put the information out, and then it's a matter of how you do that. When we get a quick sidelight story, when I first went down to the Deepwater Horizon group down there, I managed to pop around. I was one of the first few people, along with Admiral Allen, to pop around and look at all the different command structures we'd set up. And one of the pieces of incident command system that works normally very well but didn't serve us well this time was each incident command post is allowed to be autonomous in things like what GIS they use. So I went and visited 5 different places, saw 5 different GIS. That
Just
were
in
all,
case everyone doesn't understand GIS.
this is your graphics system, how you show your display. But they were using different methodologies, and because all of them were developing this independently, we had all that effort that was just being frustrated. It wasn't centrally managed. So once we got that under control and actually found something we liked, it wound up being a very, very, very powerful tool. The challenge to that is what can you rapidly scale and what can you learn very, very quickly? Because remember, you're going to cycle, if you have to sustain this, and the reason I was late for lunch was I just taking a brief on this same operation more than a year later, give you some indication of sustainment. But when you're cycling people through all the time, you want to really, really neck down that amount of time that you spend on training. So for those of you who are in the developmental world of these types of things, the more intuitive that product is, the easier it is to use by anybody, the easier it is to access. True, whether it was APAN or getting into any kind of display system, those things are really, really important design features that I'm not sure we capture very well when we put out our requirements. And then we tend to repeat those things, which we are the creatures of habit, that we use this thing every day in a non-crisis environment, and we forget about the real requirement that we're going to need when we get to crisis. So if you have to remind us of where we need to put our requirements, really, you got to think about what the higher end is, because most of the stuff we use doesn't scale well up into the kinds of crises we had, whether it was Haiti, Deepwater Horizon, the earthquake, and tsunami in Japan. The comms gear we have and the types of ways we display information don't scale particularly well.
So let me ask for Admiral Harris, because all of you have mentioned communications and the importance and the fact that the networks were useful but could have been more useful. If we were looking for the characteristics of a better network going forward, if we're trying to figure out, as we develop an unclassified information sharing mechanism, what would some of the key elements of that be from your perspective?
Well, I think some of the main things has got to be small and easily transportable. Again, we had small units setting up FARPs, forward air refueling positions for the helicopters as they would leapfrog across Pakistan to the various areas, try to get some gas and then go back again for their next mission. These teams needed small communications, easily portable. Power generation is obviously going to be huge. And the less requirement there is for a gas generator or some other facility to provide power to that communication device, the more important it'll be. because again, they don't have the wherewithal to stay on top of all the fuel requirements, do all the testing, everything else that's required. I would say it also has to be something that can go multi-spectrum so that you can talk unclass if you have to, classified. Again, some of these teams we had were not that far from places like Abbottabad or other places where it was uncertain in terms of terrorists possibly targeting U.S. forces as we were trying to do good in Pakistan. So some way for them to be able to contact mother and tell us that, hey, look, it's getting pretty shaky up here, we might need some help, would have been very, very important. So I think those would be probably the three biggest ones. You had to have something that's light, easy transportable, that is stingy on power. If you can have it with a photovoltaic cell or some other type of way to power it without having to carry fuel around would be important, and something multi-spectrum so you can talk unclassed to all the non-governmental agencies, World Food Program, the Pakistani forces who were supporting, and also get back in touch with headquarters if you had to talk about something that's a little more sensitive.
Let me ask Admiral Parker and General Keane the same question. Characteristics of an ideal network.
No, I like that. I think the first thing is I would divide it into like the first 72 hours and then your sustainability. The first 72 hours, as Ken said, we were really held at the mercy of a BlackBerry battery. And for those of you who carry that particular angry device, you know that that's just not going to work well if you're using it all the time in a place that's got weak coverage to begin with. So, you know, the simplicity of the device and the low power use was really, really important for us. And the easy access to the device. The text messaging, we were, you know, weeks into the relief efforts, we were still getting text messages from places that people buried in rubble, or even out in places that hadn't gotten their phones hooked back up yet, because because of the way it's handled in small packets and can get through in ways that voice and other data cannot. So that, you know, the portability piece really speaks. I think sustainability too is another thing. And it's not just communications. When we sent the 82nd down there, I remember I was on the phone with the 3 from the 82nd Airborne with General Fraser, and said, look, when you go down there, you have to have everything you need for 10 days. So you need 10 days of water, you need 10 days of food. I mean, we listed everything we could think of, including socks and underwear and everything else, and got the, you know, the mighty hua on the other end. On day 2, they called up and said, hey, we're out of water. I said, okay, we'll have this conversation in 8 days. So you have to think through how that stuff is going to sustain over time when you go into an environment where, you know, the problem they had was they expected to go find another water source and purify their water to some extent at the front end of that, and some other different ways of doing that. But those things did not, those conditions didn't exist necessarily on the ground. So sustainability, I think, you know, for whatever that means, and whether it's power requirements or anything else, that has to be there. And if I had to pick a third one on that one, I like the multi-spectrum piece, but I might have to just declare that that's in a slightly different definition, is it has to reach all your audiences. Because reach all the different audiences, stakeholders, who the people are, because when you're in Haiti, they communicate in different ways. We gave out these wonderful radios, little wind-up radios, as a way to get information out to folks, and we drop these things all over the country out there, and great novelty. I think they make really good sort of mantelpieces at this point for a lot of folks down there. And a lot of them are still using them, I think, based on my last report down there. But it wasn't as robust a tool as the way they normally communicate. And so taking advantage of what exists on the ground, and how this is a very extremely resilient population down there in Haiti, perhaps the same way in Pakistan. And they know how to get around these things. So you have to tap into that piece. That's why I say multi-spectrum sometimes means using what it is you've got that's already on the ground, rather than thinking you have to provide everything yourself.
General?
Yeah, I would add that, I mean, every country, and I think every situation that we respond to, certainly a foreign disaster is different, at least my experience. So what you're going to encounter, so whatever solution you come up with probably is not going to be perfect. But I would say, whatever it is, and we've talked a lot about this at Southern Command, and we applaud the efforts of Dr. Wells and those in the community that are trying to solve this and give us a solution to this. But it must be easy to use, and as I tell everybody, because I'm not all that computer literate, I'm a Ranger, means if I hover over it and I got to do more than 2 clicks, then it's probably too hard for me to use. So it needs to be easy to use, and it needs to be NGO proof. And I don't mean that in any negative manner. I mean any NGO that's out there on the edge, and they're out there on the edge, they need to be able to access this because they really have the information that we need. They really know what's going on the ground when it becomes a disaster in most cases, or they're going to get there, and we need to be able to provide them a mechanism to push information into our system so that we can collect it. The other one, it needs to be able to plug and play. By that I mean, whatever system we have needs to be able to connect to whatever national system a country that we go into is already using. In Haiti, there wasn't one. But in Guatemala, which we went to 2 months after Haiti, well, they already had a system. We didn't need to duplicate their system. We didn't need to make them use our system. We just needed to plug into their system and be able to see their data that they already were collecting. And then the last thing is it needs to have a collaboration tool in that we need to have a little chat room on here where we can collaborate and everybody can see it. And that was, we used pieces of that in Haiti, but it was on like 4 different systems, none of which talk to one another.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I'm open for questions here in just a moment. While you're thinking of a question, let me just ask one more of the panel, which is that of what could AFCEA members do to make our collective response better in future disasters like you faced?
I'll do it as a junior member of this panel. I will go ahead and jump on the grenade first. I think the biggest thing is the fact that with companies like that represent AFCEA, you all can look at the joint requirements across all of the services, sometimes better than we can because you're building it. And seeing things that not only are in common between the services, but also in common in industry, police forces, other militaries. And we talked here this morning about the cyberspace, in fact, with General Schmittel. And one of his big 4 at the beginning, he talked about authorities and how Coast Guard, certain people have certain authorities, other people have other authorities, and they never meet, and it's hard to get anything done. Well, the same thing happens, I think, in some of the communication equipment. And it's having the ability to look across what one group does, what their capacity and capabilities are, what spectrums they work in, and another. And if you all can look at what are some of the common capabilities that are used, whether you're talking about police forces with their type of role or military forces or humanitarian agencies, I think that would be very useful.
Slightly similar vein, but slightly different twist. I think if you look at how you message in the communications, and especially when you start talking about how your operation gets tweaked and moved by the political landscape, both domestically and internationally, we adopted the 3 T's. Truth plus transparency equals trust. Truth is the veracity of your data. Where's your authoritative source? Transparency is how does everybody see the same thing and correct it as you go along, think wiki. And then trust is that which you get, which allows you to have a continuing dialogue that refines those 2 things along the way, and also allows you to operate more autonomously, which is how we're accustomed to doing that in the military. As we roll down that path, I'm reminded that we don't always understand what it is we need, and sometimes we don't even see it when it's sitting in front of us. So when we're looking at requirements, the best example of this is not too long ago got an iPad. And it's a great device. It can do a lot of really amazing things until you really play with it and get to use it and understand it. And it has fundamentally changed the way I use technology now. I would not have been able to envision that because of the way I was growing up and the experiences and the habits I had. So finding a way in our conversations in fora like these to find those game changers and think about problem sets differently so that we're not the Garrett Morris school of interpreting for the deaf where you just shout the same thing louder, that you actually find a different way to communicate would be a very, very helpful thing to us. So if you can help us have those epiphanies along the way, that would be great.
I would just add, I mean, looking at the displays out here and then just some of the technological approaches that you all bring to bear and putting capability together to really do coordination and collaboration in an unclassified forum that we can use in an expeditionary manner is key. I find out something new every day when I encounter and talk to folks, whether it's use of Falcon View, use of other tools that are out there that we can field and make available for organizations, because we don't know who's going to respond within our military to the next disaster. We don't know who's going to be the JTF. And right now, our systems are not set up to provide this type of network.
Okay, there are 3 microphones here. May I please invite the panel or the audience to come to the microphones? Sir.
Sir, good afternoon. Commander Fisher. I'm with 2nd Navy Expeditionary Logistics Regiment up at Cheatham Annex. We fall under Navy Expeditionary Logistics Support Group from Admiral Patricia Wolf. She was down in Haiti as Task Force 48, working from Guantanamo Bay, kind of as the logistics hub, pushing stuff over to Haiti. I've kind of likened that operations, not to downplay it, as kind of camping in your backyard, because fortunately with Haiti we had a forward logistics base that we could push a lot of stuff down to and then get it over to Haiti, only 175 miles across the water. I guess a big question is toward Admiral Harris is, sir, what do you believe is the largest single linchpin in an operation when forward deployed somewhere, say Pakistan or so, where we don't have the convenience of operating from our home soil to such a region as close as Haiti? And also I wanted to say to Admiral Parker, sir, I appreciate the fact, because we're working on our own doctrine, we're kind of using the Joint Pub 3-TAC-29 on foreign humanitarian assistance to kind of tailor that to our forces requirements. We're currently working on the command and control section. I thought it was kind of interesting how he said it's more of a coordination and control, because of course the NGOs are the subject matter experts. We're kind of helping them out. But I guess I can open it to the whole panel is, what is the single largest linchpin to the whole operation other than communications in foreign humanitarian assistance, sir?
Outside of communications, which is obviously very vital to get anything else done, and having some way to assess just the magnitude of the problem, that was also a huge problem. When certainly nations don't want you flying your drones over top of them anyway, let alone to look for where the damage is. I say there are 3 ones that aren't talked about as much as they should be: contracting, engineering, and logistics. Now, some people can put all those together. The Marines try to do that with their CLB, and that team brings a lot of capability. But having expeditionary contracting, because there's always somebody that does the work there somewhere. And quite frankly, if you're trying to get the transition to happen more rapidly, it's best to get as much of the indigenous population involved in their own recovery as you can. So contracting, and you got to make sure you're doing things according to the law, because nobody wants to go to jail, that's along me. So contracting is critically important. Engineering, we had to take an airfield that was not ready for CH-53 helicopters, for 46 helicopters, C-130s, 17s, and everything else, trying to fly into this strip. It was not ready for that. And also to get all the food from the World Food Program and others, to the airship so that you can deliver it. So that engineering requirement was huge. And thank you, U.S. Army. We had Major Chin that showed up that was worth his weight in gold. I made him an honorary sailor for the great work he did. And of course the logistics to sustain everything else, whether it be parts, fuel, water. We were doing this in the summertime. It got to 151 degrees Fahrenheit in a couple of days. So it was pretty toasty out there. I mean centigrade, it was pretty toasty out there. So those 3 would be probably together the linchpins that make any of these forward deployed operations successful.
Thank you very much.
No, I would certainly add logistics. I think there's one other piece in there that I would add, and that is the organizational capacity of the people you're trying to help. Pretty much every time DOD shows up, we overwhelm the meetings, and different places we go. So one of the things we did was, and you can do this both in person and virtually, was to plus up the capacity of the organizations, in our case USAID, that had the lead for the relief effort. Part of that relief was their ability to push information. So they basically rode on our backbone, our network, in order to get the information out. And DoD brought that to the table in a pretty robust way. And thank you again for the services that you brought over from just 175 miles away, which is a matter of perspective as to whether that's an easy lift or not. Thank you for making it look easy.
The only thing I'd add to you, since you're talking about the doctrine and stuff, is I'm quite often asked from a JTF commander perspective, if you're ever selected as JTF commander, what's the first thing you do? And I said, if you have a plane and you're flying to disaster and you only have 3 more seats to put on the plane, have a PAO with you, have a lawyer with you, and have a contracting agent with you. Those are the 3 people that you need the most, for all the reasons that my compatriots here said. In the middle.
Sir, George Nicholson from Strat Corp. During the Surface Navy Association convention a couple of years ago, when the operation in Haiti kicked off, General Conway had just briefed the success of the V-22 Osprey. And I asked him the question. I said, you've got 32 sitting on the ramp at New River. You've got 12 V-22 sitting on the ramp at Hurlburt. Why haven't they been used for the initial assessment teams and emergency medevac and getting that in, since they could go directly in aerial relief? And General Conway's response was, nobody asked for them. Any insight?
Well, in fact, the Osprey were there. The Osprey was part of, they were part of the
24th MU.
24th MU.
But that was 2 weeks later, sir.
With the Nassau. And they were useful. I think initially, quite frankly, I don't recall how we defined the requirements. I mean, we define the requirements, not the aircraft that necessarily respond. So I'm not, when you look at it from the Joint Staff perspective, and they're looking at what's available, how soon it can get there. Basically, we were very, very fortunate in Haiti that our military were able to turn as much as they could as immediately. Obviously, what we needed was vertical lift capacity, and we needed it immediately. And we had helicopters on the ground within about 24 hours that came from Puerto Rico. There were Blackhawks that came out of Puerto Rico initially, and then the aircraft off the Carl Vinson. But I don't know where the Osprey were at the time and how that worked in terms of what were available. But they got there within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I would just add that just because nobody asked for it doesn't mean that stuff didn't show up in theater. One of our biggest challenges was just trying to figure out what was actually there and who had come to the fight. A lot of good, well-meaning, well-intended folks kept pushing things to us, and then it would show up in theater and they'd go, okay, now we need a con-out. Okay, well, if you pushed it to me, you had an idea in mind. Can you at least give me a strong man? But there were a lot of that kind of stuff that showed up down there.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, is short haul versus long haul. We had a lot of interesting discussions with the national security staff about when are you going to get the airport open? I kept saying, look, we really need to get the seaport open because you're never going to get enough in there to solve this problem if you don't get the seaport reestablished. Just, those who are on the naval services know this, and especially with that particular runway, it was a linchpin. So different uses, different things, but they were there. And if you want to be helpful and you think you can push it, push it, we'll turn it off later. That's one of the good rules of crisis response.
And I mean, one of the things was the reason the Osprey was quite helpful in the other aircraft was that they were maritime based. A big challenge in Haiti was deploying forces that were going to be put on the ground that we couldn't put fuel in because there was little to no fuel, and we couldn't sustain them initially. So one of the things was pushing what we could and make it maritime based. In fact, all of our helicopters, besides the 4 Blackhawks I mentioned that initially responded, obviously in addition to the Coast Guard's helicopters that did the initial life saving, we kept our vertical lift maritime based just because we really did not have very good locations to base any of our forces out of on the land when you get into the aviation realm.
So one more quick point on the helicopters is that actually you can make things worse. So you have to have a mix of helicopters. And for example, you have some family that may have just put together a lean-to, which is all they had. You take a 53 or an Osprey, now you have destroyed their lean-to, you've made their life, which is already bad, even worse. We have some helicopters with a lower rotor wash who can kind of get in there to 46, old but reliable, with less of an impact. So you've got to have a mix of capabilities too.
So we have 3 questions in about 6 minutes, so if we could make them quick, please. Actually, over here first.
Mark Nesselrode from Kinetic. You talked about information and also the fact that Dr. Wells brought up 350 HADR to 22 combat. Other than information, if you could have a capability or maybe one or two to get rid of the stress on current forces, which are being just beat to death and we're flying the wings off things and stealing things from units, what kind of capabilities would be useful in HADR that could either enhance or supplant the military that maybe industry could bring?
Before we answer that, let me take the middle question here. We'll take all 3 questions and answer them together.
Sure. My question, this panel actually touches on an issue that's near and dear to me because one of my master's thesis dealt with rapid onset, the international response to rapid onset natural disasters with a focus on earthquakes and tsunamis, one of the case studies being our response to Haiti. That said, my question for Lieutenant General Keane is, due to your dealings with NGOs, what differences did you observe between northern and southern NGOs surrounding capabilities and willingness to integrate with U.S. military disaster relief? And for Vice Admiral Parker, how effective how effective have we been in integrating the local artisans and indigenous workforce who often possess widely divergent skill sets at various levels of proficiency to assist with United States military responses to natural disasters?
Last question.
Yes, Chaplain Lindblad. I'm from a Coast Guard training center in Yorktown, but I'm also a Navy chaplain. And this has a political tone, so you don't have to name names. But the question is getting to go. For example, I watched the World Trade Center collapse. I called a friend called me who happened to be an admiral, and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "The comfort." And they sent it. But I had to spend the next 2 days running around to the city and state of New York drawing pictures of ships so they knew what they were getting and what they could do with it before they would accept it. So how do you get to go with some of the politicians? Any experiences there? Thank you.
Okay, let's just take the panel in sequence. General Keane, please.
In the case of Haiti, getting the go was not a problem because the president immediately declared the following morning that the U.S. would respond and respond robustly. So it was very much the military basically pushing forward whatever assistance that was needed. The question on HADR and what forces are available, my view is I think our military it trains for its core mission, and that is to defend our nation. I found that the forces that responded to Haiti responded very appropriately and were suited to do the mission. Actually, they came with too much capability because in a disaster you don't have the time, in this particular case, to mold your forces to the exact requirements, so you're getting a lot more capability in some cases. So you could argue that it wasn't efficient, but it was very effective. And what's important here is saving lives, and sometimes you have to sacrifice efficiency. So we had more in some cases. So the question is, do we need to have a HADR force within the military? I would say I'm not sure that's necessary, because we respond when our national leaders tell us the military is needed, and I think the last figure I heard from USAID that only 2% of the disasters that our nation responds to is the military asked to participate in that. Even though we respond a lot, USAID responds 98% of the time quite fine without U.S. military assistance. So I think there's a balance there in terms of where we can invest in our military in that regard.
Then just the other question was asked, difference between different kinds of NGOs and the local ability to help.
Yeah. Well, what I learned working with NGOs, obviously they have their own board of directors, they have their own direction in what they are doing, whether they're medical or whether they are dealing in other social sectors. And most of them were really built around the local help. It had very little international assistance. They were generally getting funding and had some international or outside Haiti leadership, but 95% of that NGO was Haitian, and they hired Haitians, and most of them had already been there. Those that showed up after the earthquake were heavily international to begin with, but very quickly transitioned and made themselves very applicable because it was very important that they hire local to understand the conditions and working. So I found all the NGOs, for the most part, I mean, very easy to work with. It was a lot of education in terms of, okay, what do you do, what do we do? We found ourselves in a situation where we needed one another and had to work together.
So I think that will be the last word by time. And I want to thank the audience very much and thank the panel members very much. I'd also like to announce that I believe it's official that Sinclair has recently been selected for a second star. Congratulations. Yeah.